All right, what's going on, you guys? Nick here with Nick's Strength and Power. So I wanted to make a video about the 1971 Mr. Olympia competition. Now, the 1971 Olympia was a very important contest in the history of bodybuilding for a number of reasons. Number one, this was the first year that Arnold ever defended his title. And number two, interestingly enough, Arnold was the only competitor at the 1971 Mr. Olympia competition, but I'll get to that in a minute. Number three, this was the first Olympia held outside of the United States. It was actually held in Paris, France, and it's typically held in New York up until that point. Number four, 1971 was the first year that the IFBB implemented their non-sanctioned policy. So essentially what the non-sanctioned policy was when an IFBB bodybuilder would compete in a rival organization like the AAU or like NABBA, they would be disqualified from upcoming IFBB shows or even banned from competing in the IFBB altogether. And that is what we saw happen to Lee Priest in 2006 when he competed in a non-sanctioned event and the IFBB ended up banning him for life. And that is why you see so many videos of Lee Priest talking negatively about the IFBB, because arguably it's kind of a stupid rule nowadays, but it made sense back in the day, and I'll get to that later. So also, to put things in perspective, in 1971, the total prize money purse for that Olympia was only $1,000. So to put that in perspective, in 2016, Phil Heath got $400,000 for winning the Olympia, and I believe the total prize money purse for men's open bodybuilding in 2016 was close to $700,000. So from 1971 to 2016, we went from $1,000 in prize money to almost $700,000 in prize money. And the reason for that, a lot of people say, was this 1971 Olympia that really set a lot of things into motion in terms of making the Olympia the premier bodybuilding competition that it is today. So back in 1971, the Olympia was actually not the premier competition. The Olympia had started in 1965, so in 1971, the Olympia had only been around for about 6 years. So in the 70s and 60s, and even the 50s, the NABBA Mr. Universe competition was really the crown jewel of bodybuilding, and that's the show that everybody wanted to win. And the reason being is because the NABBA Mr. Universe was way more established than the Olympia. The Mr. Universe competition had been around since 1950. So in 1971, the NABBA Mr. Universe already had 21 years of history, whereas the Mr. Olympia only had 6. So for that reason, it was providing, quite a bit of competition to the Weider brothers and their Olympia competition that they wanted to be kind of the crown jewel of bodybuilding. So that's why in 1971, the Weider brothers decided to implement that policy, because at that time, all the best bodybuilders in the world competing in the Olympia were also going over right after the Olympia or right before the Olympia to compete in the Mr. Universe competition. And the Weider brothers didn't like that. They wanted the Mr. Olympia to be the Mr. Olympia. They didn't want the Mr. Olympia to also be the NABBA Mr. Universe. They wanted the Mr. Olympia to be the IFBB Mr. Olympia and only the IFBB Mr. Olympia. They didn't want them having all these other titles from other federations. They wanted their title to be the title, and they wanted their guys to be their guys. So that's why they implemented this policy. And it worked. So basically this year, the 1971 Olympia that year, the reason why Arnold was the only competitor is because the other 3 competitors were all disqualified for competing in rival organizations. So Arnold's main competition was Sergio Oliva, and Sergio Oliva was disqualified for actually competing in that NABBA Mr. Universe a week prior to that Olympia competition. So that is the reason Sergio was not there, and a lot of people were disappointed that they couldn't see him go head-to-head with Arnold, because he was Arnold's main competition that year and in other years as well. So other competitors that got disqualified were Roy Callender and also Franco Colombo, Arnold's buddy. So those 2 guys got disqualified as well, but Franco and Sergio were also allowed to guest pose at this show, because the Weider brothers knew the fans were going to be disappointed if they didn't see a good, pose down, or they didn't get to see Sergio pose, they didn't get to see Franco pose. So they actually allowed them to guest pose, but they did not allow them to compete. So that is why in a lot of the photos you'll see Sergio posing on the 1971 Olympia stage, but he's kind of, not in Olympia shape. He kind of looks like he's in off-season condition, and that's the reason why. So also it's important to note that in the background of a lot of these photos, you're going to see 1971 Mr. Universe written on the banner. And the reason for that is because the IFBB also had their own Mr. Universe competition, which they held in the same venue the same week of that 1971 Olympia. So back in the 70s and the 60s, and I think even into the 80s, there was actually 3 different Mr. Universe competitions. I believe it was NABBA, IFBB, and AAU all had their own Mr. Universe. And I think there was like a Mr. Universe Pro and then an amateur, and there's all kinds of different Mr. Universe titles. So when you hear people talking about Mr. Universe, it could be any one of those 3. But back in the day, the NABBA Mr. Universe was the really big title to win. So after that year, the Olympia gained a lot of traction, and pretty much everybody stopped competing. Well, not everybody, but most of the main bodybuilders stopped competing in those rival organizations, and they started competing only in the Olympia. And that non-sanctioned policy really made the Olympia kind of a coveted title because people were being disqualified and prevented from competing. So everybody kind of recognized the Olympia as now becoming, this is the title that we all want. This is the title that we need. And from that point on, the Olympia really gained a lot of steam and momentum in terms of being one of the best titles that you could possibly win. So a lot of people think that Arnold was simply handed the trophy because he was the only one that showed up, and technically that's the case. But I think that Arnold actually came correct, and he actually came in one of the best shapes of his entire career. In my opinion, Arnold's best years were 1971, 1973, and 1974. So in 1971, which is the Olympia that we're talking about now, Arnold claimed to have weighed 246 pounds. And in 1974, which was Arnold's heaviest year on stage, he claims to have been about 250 pounds on stage, but a lot of people dispute that. So in the 1971 Olympia, Arnold was pretty big, and he was really conditioned, as you can see from these photos. In my opinion, it's one of Arnold's best 3 appearances. So let me know what you guys think in the comment section below. Do you think Arnold looked good? What do you think about the non-sanctioned policy? Do you think it's bullshit, or do you think it's still relevant? Because back in the day, the policy was relevant and it made sense because the Weider brothers wanted to eliminate their competition. But now in 2016, 2017, there's really no competition to the IFBB. There's really no other shows that really rival the Olympia in terms of prestige or in terms of, being the most coveted title. There's really no other organizations that rival the IFBB. I know there's a couple organizations out there that people like to compete in, but there's really no title that holds the amount of weight that the Olympia holds. So I think the kind of the non-sanctioned policy still existing in the IFBB today might not no longer be relevant. So let me know what you guys think in the comment section below. Please give the video a thumbs up if you enjoyed it. Nick Strength and Power, signing out.